the China-US power struggle is just beginning. Chinese President Xi Jinping has an ambitious master plan for his country's transformation into a wealthy, technology-driven global economic power, and U.S. companies need not apply. That's why the current trade rumble between the U.S. and China, in which the Trump administration is threatening to slap tariffs on $34 billion of Chinese imports, and Beijing promises to respond in kind, is far more than just to spat over market restrictions, intellectual property rights, and the epic U.S. deficit. On a deeper level, the standoff reflects an escalating economic and military rivalry between a status quo power and one of the most remarkable growth miracles in history. It is a clash between two divergent systems, one state-directed, the other market-driven, with markedly divergent worldviews and national aspirations. That strategic tension seems likely to intensify, regardless of how the current brinkmanship over tariffs plays out. It is also a battle for global influence. Whereas the U.S. has long sought to spread democracy and free markets to other nations, China's ruling Communist Party is just starting to pitch its heavy-handed growth model as an alternative for developing nations. And Xi is backing it up with hundreds of billions of dollars in loans for infrastructure projects from Asia to Europe and beyond. In the U.S., a bipartisan consensus has begun to emerge that now is the time to stand up to China, even if many oppose President Donald Trump's tactics. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, a Democrat, has attacked Trump for not being tougher on China, saying last week that failure to change Beijing's behavior now could hurt the U.S. economy for generations to come. With a roughly $13 trillion economy and expanding wealth, China is now going head-to-head with the U.S. in advanced manufacturing and digital technologies. It also has the wherewithal to make rapid technological progress in defense, particularly with air-to-air missile systems that pose a strategic challenge in Asia for the U.S. and its allies. Xi is playing a long game, pursuing what he calls the Chinese dream, or the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. To get there, he has set targets to double his country's per capita gross domestic product to $10,000 by 2021 and refashion China into a tech powerhouse, competitive in robotics, new energy vehicles, chips, software, and other bleeding-edge industries, under his Made in China 2025 program. A separate development strategy envisions China ruling in artificial intelligence by 2030. The aim is to produce global champions, not just national ones, and Xi's government is ready to use the commanding heights of its one-party state to steer subsidies and use preferential policies and ambitious local content rules favoring Chinese companies to get there. At stake are industries that make up about 40% of China's value-added industrial manufacturing sector, according to an analysis by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, citing data by the Rhodium Group, a research firm. Predatory economics. China's push for more self-reliance may reverse the trend toward deeper economic integration with the U.S. that came following China's accession into the World Trade Organization in 2001. China is the single largest foreign purchaser of U.S. manufactured goods, led by transportation, chemical, computer, and electronics, outside of North America, according to the National Association of Manufacturers. Chinese goods have also flooded across American shores, pushing up the U.S. trade deficit with China more than fourfold to $375 billion last year. The Trump administration views such deficits as alarming and Chinese trade practices as brash mercantilism, even a national security threat. U.S. Defense Secretary Jim Mattis labeled China a strategic competitor using predatory economics in January, as he unveiled the Pentagon's national defense strategy. Xi views his economy's shift into higher-tech manufacturing not only as a crucial part of its development, what with surging labor costs, a rapidly aging population, and high corporate debt levels, but also as a fulfillment of China's destiny. That process is well underway. China is set to overtake the entire euro area this year, according to data compiled by Bloomberg. Talks to avoid a trade war have stalled in part over U.S. demands that China reduce state support for high-tech industries. While China has signaled a willingness to buy more American goods to balance out the deficit, it has refused to trade away what it views as an essential part of its economic future. Tech companies are on the front lines of this contest for global supremacy. Back in 2013, Chinese investigators started making life difficult for American tech guardian warriors like Google, Intel Corp, Apple Inc., and Microsoft Corp. After a magazine with ties to the Communist Party sounded the alarm about their dominant role in Chinese networks and business, the U.S. has been just as inhospitable to Chinese tech concerns, with telecommunication makers like Huawei Technologies Co., ZTE Corp., and China Mobile Ltd. being viewed as national security risks. The Trump administration has also weighed restrictions on Chinese companies and startups in sectors ranging from aerospace to robotics. This week's tariffs, however, may show which side has the stronger hand. The first batch will take force Friday barring any last-minute deal. Trump has threatened duties on another $200 billion worth of Chinese goods if Beijing imposes countermeasures. Xi is betting that Trump will back down as price increases in politically sensitive states make him worry about losing the next election in 2020. Xi enjoys something closer to lifetime job security thanks to the repeal of Chinese presidential term limits in February. The sharp downturn in Chinese stock markets amid rising trade tensions is scarcely a threat to his rule. His party-led government has a big say over strategy and investments plans at giant state-owned enterprises, which control 40% of China's industrial assets and some of the world's biggest banks. Still, anti-trade rhetoric underpinned Trump's election win, and if anything the former New York real estate developer has doubled down on using tariffs in spats with both foes and allies. Although polls suggest Trump faces difficult midterm elections in November, a fight to replace a U.S. Supreme Court justice may prompt his political base to overlook slightly higher monthly bills. Economists and trade experts, who testified in June before the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission, set up by Congress to track the national security implications of trade with China, say tariffs are likely to inflict a lot of economic damage on both economies and depress global trade. Great unwinding. China will also return the favor. Beijing has announced plans to target U.S. auto, aircraft, plastics, and chemicals sectors, and the imposition of tariffs will not solve the underlying Chinese distortive behavior, warned Linda Mengetti-Dempsey, Vice President of International Economic Affairs at the National Association of Manufacturers. Instead of using tariffs, the U.S. could sought to join with the European Union and Japan to bring a case against China at the World Trade Organization. But that's unlikely after Trump slapped tariffs on EU nations and Japan, while also undermining the WTO. His withdrawal from the 11-nation Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal removed another key device to alter China's behavior. Some prominent academics are calling for more drastic measures to undercut China's practice of trading market access for technology transfers, such as unwinding Asian supply networks in high-end tech sectors. Harvard Business School professor Willie Cichy favors tax incentives and even setting up import processing zones in the U.S. to repatriate offshore suppliers for the likes of Intel, Apple, and Microsoft. It would strengthen our ability to sustain the most advanced semiconductor fabs in the United States, she said. In the end, the U.S. and China economic rivalry probably won't be decided by administrative law judges or trade negotiators, but in the global marketplace. Right now, the U.S. still enjoys a lead in many tech and manufacturing sectors, particularly aerospace and biotech. Yet the days when China could be dismissed as merely a low-wage assembly center for Western manufacturers are long gone. This is a country on what it views as a historic mission to become a 21st-century economic power, and the contest is just beginning. China, unsure of how to handle Trump, braces for new Cold War. Perhaps nowhere outside America's heartland is Donald Trump given more credit than in Beijing. In government offices and think tanks, universities, and state-run newsrooms, there is an urgent debate underway about what many here see as the hidden motive for Washington's escalating trade war against President Xi Jinping's government, a grand strategy, devised and led by Trump, to thwart China's rise as a global power. The Trump administration has made it clear that containing China's development is a deeper reason behind the tariff actions, said He Huiwen, a former Commerce Ministry official, and now a senior fellow at the Center for China and Globalization, an independent research group filled with former bureaucrats. These sentiments were echoed by many of the more than 24 current and former government officials, business executives, state-affiliated researchers, diplomats, and state-run media editors interviewed for this article. Most requested anonymity to speak their minds about sensitive matters. A common suspicion ran through the conversations that the tariffs are just a small part of Trump's plan to prevent China from overtaking the U.S. as the world's largest economy. Several people expressed concern that the two nations may be heading into a long struggle for global dominance that recalls the last century's rivalry between the U.S. and Soviet Union. The trade war has prompted thinking in China on whether a new Cold War has begun, said An Gang, a senior research fellow at the Pan-Goal Institution, an independent research group in Beijing, whose experts include former government officials. The dispute, he says, now has military and strategic implications, reflecting concern among some in Beijing that tensions could spill over into Taiwan, the South China Sea and North Korea. The general pessimism is a major shift among China's elite, many of whom had initially welcomed the rise of a U.S. president viewed as a transactional pragmatist who would cut a deal to narrow a $375 billion trade deficit for the right price. Now, with tariffs on $34 billion of goods already in effect and duties on another $216 billion in the pipeline, a majority saw no quick fix to a problem that is starting to rattle the country's top leaders. Smart negotiator. The turning point came a few months ago, when Trump put a stop to a deal for China to buy more energy and agricultural goods to narrow the trade deficit. Not only did that insult Xi, China's all-powerful leader, who had sent a personal emissary to Washington for the negotiations, but it crystallized a view in Beijing that Trump won't quit until he thwarts China's rise once and for all. Donald Trump is a smart negotiator who has accumulated abundant experience in doing business for many years, and also from the show The Apprentice, said Wang Huiyao, an advisor to China's cabinet and founder of the Center for China and Globalization, whose advisory council is stacked with former lawmakers. While China is open to negotiations, he said, Trump's pressure tactics will only arouse Chinese nationalism, which will be counterproductive. The ramifications of that are now rippling through a society that has embraced America's consumer culture. Big Macs, Bentley cars, and Chanel handbags are ubiquitous in Beijing, even as it retains a one-party political system that champions large state enterprises and has little tolerance for dissent. The trade war is leading to some soul-searching in Beijing. Discussions quickly turn to the sustainability of China's state-centered economy and the leadership of Xi, who can rule the country indefinitely after he led a successful effort earlier this year to repeal presidential term limits. Xi criticism. The hushed debate centers over the wisdom of Xi's goals for rapid growth and his decision to announce China's ambitions to the world. This was a dramatic shift from former leader Deng Xiaoping's famous dictum, hide your strength, bide your time. Critics of Xi say policies like Made in China 2025 and the Belt and Road Initiative raised alarm in the West and prompted the U.S. to target China before it could build critical technologies. This was seen by how swiftly Trump could bring down ZTE Corp, China's second-largest telecommunications equipment maker. In April, his administration prohibited the company from buying essential components from American suppliers after it violated laws banning the sale of U.S. technology to Iran. The move prompted ZTE to cease major operating activities until Trump came to the rescue and helped engineer a settlement. Although ZTE is now back up and running, the episode showed China just how dependent the nation is on the U.S. for high-end know-how. It has also highlighted wider efforts to block Chinese firms from acquiring tech companies by the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, which reviews deals on national security grounds. All in all, it amounts to high-tech containment of China, said Shi Yunhong, a foreign affairs advisor to the State Council and director of Renmin University's Center on American Studies in Beijing. The U.S., of course, sees things differently. Officials have repeatedly said they don't want to prevent China from growing, they just want to stop it from breaking the rules and stealing intellectual property, allegations that officials in Beijing repeatedly deny. Off-the-books nonsense. The Pentagon recently named China and Russia as two U.S. rivals actively seeking to co-opt or replace the free and open order that has enabled global security and prosperity since World War II. Last month, U.S. Secretary of State Michael Pompeo obliquely criticized China for wooing developing countries with cheap financing for infrastructure projects, saying the U.S. believes in strategic partnerships, not strategic dependency. With American companies, citizens around the world know that what you see is what you get: honest contracts, honest terms, and no need for off-the-books nonsense, Pompeo said in a speech before he attended a regional security forum in Singapore. Another advantage of the U.S., he said, is that we will help them keep their people free from coercion or great power domination. Across the political spectrum in China, from reformers to nationalists, there is a growing consensus that the nation needs to open up more to foreign business, better protect intellectual property, and create a more level playing field. The confrontation with the U.S. was due in large part to China doing nothing for many years to reduce the surplus, widen market access, and ease state control, according to Xi from Renmin University. China faces a new, uncertain situation and needs to undergo review and adjustment, he said. We didn't consider other nations' feelings in our strategic great leap forward. Yet sentiments like these are tempered by a reluctance to be seen as bending to Trump's demands. Several people said that at first they viewed the U.S. tariffs as not all bad if they prompted the government to make long overdue adjustments in China's approach to doing business with the West. But as the trade war, and the war of words, has escalated, many of these same people are now digging in against the U.S., saying China won't be bullied. Apart from some criticism from academics and grumbling from unnamed officials, so far there is little visible sign from China's opaque government that the trade war has impacted Xi's ability to control the levers of money and power. If Xi and his ministers are themselves suffering any doubts, it is not reflected in the official press. The People's Daily newspaper, the main mouthpiece of the Communist Party, recently confronted critics who say it was a mistake for China to be so public with its global goals. Such a heavy weight cannot be hidden by taking a low-key approach, the paper said in a commentary last week, just like an elephant cannot conceal its body behind a small tree. Beijing has signaled a willingness to strike a deal that narrows the trade deficit. But policy advisors see little room to budge on some of Trump's other demands, including an end to subsidies for strategic industries, a stop to forced technology transfer, and more competition for state-owned enterprises. Those stipulations, shared widely by both Republicans and Democrats alike, are seen as posing an existential threat to the Communist Party, whose legitimacy to rule hinges on its ability to improve livelihoods. Trump has tried to portray China as an adversary on the ropes, with a falling stock market, sliding currency, and slowing economy. It is certainly true that the U.S. economy is far stronger than China's. But in Beijing, there is general confidence that in a test of wills between the two presidents, it is Xi who doesn't have to worry about elections or the wrath of special interest groups who can endure more pain. China has also hinted there are ways to turn up the pressure on Trump, if necessary. Tariffs on automobiles, semiconductors, and Boeing airplanes are off the table, according to Wei Jianguo, a former vice commerce minister and now vice director of China Center for International Economic Exchanges, a group with a mission to improve China's soft power. While China is dependent on U.S. chips to make high-performance mobile devices and can't completely cut ties with Boeing, it served as the second largest market for American-made cars after Canada. If you want to hit Trump hard, give him a right hook so he remembers the pain, Wei said. The instinct to fight back comes naturally to China. The century of humiliation that followed the Opium Wars in the mid-1800s, in which foreign powers forced China to open its markets and provide access to strategic ports, is etched on the national psyche and used in Communist Party propaganda to spur nationalism. Most dangerous period. Nearly everyone interviewed in Beijing was looking ahead to the midterm elections in the U.S. to see where things go next. While Standard Bank predicted on August 15 that Trump would look to cut a deal before then to ride a stock market surge to victory, the consensus in China saw a higher chance of a deal if the Republicans get walloped, as polls predict. China announced on Thursday that lower-level talks were set to resume later this month. "We're talking to China, they very much want to talk," Trump said Thursday at a cabinet meeting at the White House. "They just are not able to give us an agreement that is acceptable, so we're not going to do any deal until we get one that is fair to our country." Next to nobody is betting on a quick resolution. While Trump could tactically shift course at any time, similar to what he has done with NAFTA, the European Union and North Korea, with China he has persistently ignored opportunities to lower tensions. The US and China are now in the most dangerous period in the past 40 years, said Liu Xiang, an expert in relations between the countries at the government-run Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Mr. Trump put a knife on our neck. We will never surrender. 5 sticking points keeping Xi and Trump from a trade deal. From President Donald Trump's trade deficit complaints to Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping's concerns about U.S. efforts to contain his country's rise, a lot divides the leaders of the world's 2 largest economies. But if you lay aside the overarching disputes, 5 specific sticking points come up over and over among the diplomats, executives, and trade negotiators seeking to end the trade war between Washington and Beijing. Problem is, resolving any one of them would require China to rethink a development model that has made the country rich and kept the Communist Party in power long past the Cold War. 1. Technology transfer. The U.S. contends that China's requirements on foreign companies to enter joint ventures in sectors from cars to aerospace represent a de facto mandate to share proprietary technology with local firms. The Trump administration has cited such intellectual property concerns while proposing tariffs on some $250 billion of Chinese goods using Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974. China denies forcing companies to transfer technology and argues that joint venture provisions are essential to closing the country's industrial gap with the West. Beijing also sees the practice as a right guaranteed by China's 2001 accession to the World Trade Organization as a developing economy. Sometimes, tech transfer is an arrangement made between companies to trade technology for markets, said Wei Jianguo, a former vice commerce minister who is now an executive deputy director of the China Center for International Economic Exchanges. 2. Industrial overcapacity. Close ties to the party and easy money from government banks fed a vast expansion of China's state-owned enterprises during its long economic boom. Those industrial giants have been slow to shed excess capacity as growth moderates, flooding global markets with products and putting pressure on overseas jobs. Surplus Chinese steel exceeded the entire combined output of France and Germany last year. China was among the prime targets of U.S. steel and aluminum tariffs imposed by Trump on national security grounds under Section 232 of the Trade Act. While China has been trimming output as part of Xi's supply-side structural reform program, doing it as fast as the U.S. wants risks mass job cuts that could spur unrest against the ruling party. 3. So reform. Although China's embrace of capitalist market forces powered its expansion, the party never surrendered control over the means of production. State-owned enterprises still hold around 40% of the country's industrial assets, and include some of the world's biggest banks. China has shown little appetite for the sort of market reforms and privatization efforts sought by the Trump administration. In fact, making state-owned enterprises big and strong is a key piece of Xi's strategy for expanding Chinese economic influence, and a series of mergers are replacing state oligopolies with monopolies. Reducing their number would remove a powerful tool to control the economy and manage risk. Without state-owned enterprises, China could no longer call itself a socialist system, said Liu Xiang, an expert on U.S.-China relations at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. 4. Industrial policies. Another legacy of China's socialist roots are centrally planned industrial policies that focus the country's vast resources toward strategic goals. Xi has built much of his plan to complete China's rise to superpower status on a series of signature policies such as Made in China 2025. The program directs subsidies toward the domination of 10 key industries, including aircraft, new energy vehicles, and biotechnology. U.S. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross has described the program as an attack on American genius because it gives Chinese companies an advantage against firms from Boeing Co. to Intel Corp. But Chinese officials see it as a way to climb up the value chain. 5. Cloud computing. The internet has presented a daunting challenge to the party's effort to control China's almost 1.4 billion citizens, leading Xi to enact a strict cyber sovereignty regime to better manage what information flows into and out of its borders. While that push has drawn a variety of complaints from U.S. companies, they are particularly loud in the area of cloud computing. Last year, China required local storage of Chinese data and barred foreign companies from owning or operating their own data centers in the country, ostensibly to protect privacy and intellectual property. Now, U.S. officials want China to roll back the restrictions, which they say make it harder for technology firms such as Alphabet Inc., Apple Inc., and Amazon.com Inc. to secure a fair share of the world's largest internet market.